So good afternoon, everybody. I will continue on the chapter about family and sexuality. And now here, this topic on this chapter, we're going to talk about family partnering and show you how we can do this analysis with data from the census. Which variables do we use from the census in order to do this analysis here? And I pretty much, based on data from surveys, and more specifically from an American Community Survey, we can divide families in the US into these 4 types, depending on and how the couples are. It's okay, man. See you later. And how the families, how the partners in the family are what are the members of the couple. And one type of family partnering is when we have a married or cohabiting male and male. So those are gay partners. A married or cohabiting female and female, lesbian partners. 2 persons living together as married male and female. So they are opposite sex, married partners. And then a 4th type, a cohabiting male and female, opposite sex, cohabiting partners. So the idea here is that we are just trying to classify different families depending on the partners that are present in the household. And because gay couples overall and lesbian couples overall, they're a smaller percentage of the population, we combine those that are married and cohabiting. We put them all together and call them here, in this case, gay partners. And we combine the married cohabiting female and female and call them lesbian partners. Because the other family partner types, we have more people proportional in the population, we can classify them separated. So we can have married people, female and male, and cohabiting male and female, right? So the reason that here we have it separated by being married or cohabiting is more because of the sample size of having a bigger proportion in the population, okay? This is the questionnaire that we had in the 2010 census, and it's pretty much these questions here, they are asked for all people in the household. And actually, we have this question not only in the American Community Survey, but we also have in the short questionnaire from the census that it's implemented for everybody in the US, or it's supposed to be asked to everybody in the American society. And this question about last name, first name, how is the person related to the first person in the household, the sex and everything. This question here, all these questions, they're asked for all people in the household. So the person 1 in the household, usually that person is classified as being the head of the household, right? Starting on person 2, and then person 3, 4, and so on, whatever, how many people you have in the household, that person has to say what's the relationship that specific person has with the head of the household. So is person 2 a husband or wife, or person 2 is the unmarried partner of person 1. If person 1 is a male, and person 2 is a female, and person 2 says that she's a wife of person 1, so that person is going to be classified here, opposite sex married partners. If the person 2 could be the same thing, is a male, and person 1 is a woman, and person 2 is a male and the husband of person one, so we would have, again, opposite sex married partners. If person two is an unmarried partner and person two sex is again different than the sex of person one, so we have a cohabiting male and female. On the other hand, if the sex of person one and the sex of person two is the same, and person two is the husband or wife or the unmarried partner of person one, so that household is going to be either a married or cohabiting male and male household or a married or cohabiting female and female household. If person one and person two are both male, and person two is classified either here or here, that household is going to be a gay partner household. If in that household, both of them are female, and person two is the wife of person one or the unmarried partner of person one, we're going to have a lesbian partner household. So with these really simple questions about the relationship that person two has with person one and the sex of both of these persons, one and two, we can classify the families in the US. And in this specific portion of the textbook, the authors, they analyzed data for 366 metropolitan areas in the US, using data from the 2010 census. And they estimate prevalent indexes for each type of partnering. What these indexes try to show? They show the ratio of the proportion of each type living in a metropolitan area to the proportion of all households that are located in the metropolitan area. So we compare the chances, the proportion that a specific type of family partnering happens in that metropolitan area divided by the proportion of all households in that area. These ratios, they measure over and under representation of each type of partnering in a geographical area relative to the overall population in that area. Okay? When this index, this ratio, equals 1, it means that partnering type is as likely as a randomly selected household to locate in that metropolitan area. If it equals to 1, I'm saying that I can find that type of family partnering with the same chance around all this metropolitan area. If the index is above 1, the partner type is more likely to live in the metropolitan area than in a random couple household. I'm saying that there is more concentration of that type of partnering in that specific metropolitan area than a random couple that I could find in those areas. If the index is below 1, the partnering type is less likely to live in the metropolitan area than a random couple household. So I'm going to show here the results from these indexes. And the indexes, like I'm showing here, they can be equal to 1, above 1 unit, below 1 unit. An easy way to interpret them in percentage terms is to subtract 1 unit from the index and multiply by 100. And this percentage interpretation is usually convenient and make it easier for us to understand the result, mostly when the index is below 1 unit, okay? So let's go. The prevalence ratio index for gay partners, looking at these metropolitan areas based on 2010 census data, equals 0.69. So we just go back to the previous slide. 0.69 minus 1 is 0.31 times 100, 31%. It's below 1 unit. So that partnering type is less likely to live in the metropolitan area than a random couple household. The overall ratio for gay partners is 0.69. So what does it mean? 0.69 minus 1 multiplied by 100, 31%. In the average metropolitan area, gay couples are 31% less likely to live there than would be a couple from a randomly selected metropolitan household. Lesbian partners. The overall result for all these metropolitan areas is 0.86. 0.86 minus 1 is minus 0.14 times 100 minus 14%. The same thing that we had here. 0.69 minus 1 minus 0.31 minus 0.31 times 100, 31% negative. That's why it's less. And here's also 14% negative. So lesbian partners are 14% less likely to live in those metropolitan areas than would be a couple from a randomly selected metropolitan household. What about opposite sex couples, both married and cohabiting? Both of the results are above 1 unit. So if you get this number here, 1.02 minus 1 is 0.02 times 100, 2% positive. So opposite sex married partners are 2% more likely to live in the metropolitan area than would be a couple from a randomly selected metropolitan household. Cohabiting partners, 3% more likely. But look at these results. For the gay partners and lesbian partners, these results are kind of strong. They are usually farther away from zero, right? This number here is 0.31 units there away from zero. This number here is 0.14 units away from zero. This one is only 0.02 units away from zero. This one here is 0.03 units only away from zero. So what do these overall results about family partnering in these metropolitan areas based on the 2010 census show to us about the US? That opposite sex partners, both married and cohabiting, they are kind of randomly distributed across all these metropolitan areas. Right? 2% more likely, 3% more likely. Okay, it's different than zero, but it's not so strong. But then when we see this 31% less likely to be in those metropolitan areas than a random selected metropolitan household, and here 14% less likely, it's showing that gay partners and lesbian partners, they tend to segregate in specific metropolitan areas across the country. They are not so randomly distributed as opposite sex married partners and opposite sex cohabiting partners. So these results here, 0.69, 0.86, 1.02, and 1.03 are exactly the same results that I just showed in the previous slide here, exactly those numbers. And this is the overall mean across all these metropolitan areas that they are analyzing using 2010 census data. But if you look at each one of the metropolitan areas that they have in their data, they see that gay couples and lesbian couples, households that have like gay couples and lesbian couples, they vary. Their concentration, the geographical concentration varies much more across these metropolitan areas than if you compare to opposite sex couples, both married and cohabiting. So married and cohabiting, these numbers here are showing that they are pretty much kind of like randomly distributed because it's not so far away from one. And if you look across all these metropolitan areas, the standard deviation, this measure of variation across all these metropolitan areas, it's really small as well. They don't vary as much compared to the variation that you see across metropolitan areas in terms of location of gay and lesbian couples. So what's the minimum and maximum value for these ratios for each one of these types of family partnering across these metropolitan areas that they are analyzed? For gay couples, it varies from 0.26 to 2.78. So we are saying that the gay couples are 2.78 times more likely to live in San Francisco than to live in a randomly selected household from all these metropolitan areas. So they concentrate a lot in San Francisco. See the way that I interpreted this. They are 2.78 times more likely. I'm interpreting in terms of how many times they are more likely to be found there. What would I have to do to interpret this in percentage terms? I have to get 2.78 minus 1. It's 1.78. 1.78 times 100. Gay couples are 178% more likely to be found in San Francisco than in a randomly selected household across all these metropolitan areas. It's the same thing as saying individual A makes 2 times more money than individual B. It's the same thing of saying individual A makes 100% more money than individual B, right? And what about Grand Forks, 0.26? 0.26 minus 1 is minus 0.74 times 100 minus 74%. So gay couples are 74% less likely to be found in Grand Forks than in a randomly select household across this metropolitan area. So we see that they are really concentrated in specific metropolitan areas. And the one with the highest value is San Francisco. Lesbian couples, the highest value in Ithaca. They are 2.97 times more likely to be found in Ithaca than in a randomly selected household across these metropolitan areas. Minus 0.32 minus 1. They are 68% less likely to be found in Wausau than in a randomly selected household. So here's 68% less likely, and here's 74% less likely. You also see variation for opposite sex married couples and cohabiting couples. But see that these numbers here, the minimum and the maximum, they are much closer to 1 unit. Still, in Provo-Orem, you have 1.46 times more chances of finding opposite sex married couples than in a randomly selected household across this metropolitan area. So there is some concentration. But this number is closer to 1 unit. This number is closer to 1 unit than these 2 numbers here. This number is also closer to 1 unit than these 2 numbers here. Opposite sex cohabiting couples, they have more variation too compared to married couples. This 34 here, 0.34, is farther away from 1 unit than the 0.78. So it shows that married couples tend to be more homogeneous, their distribution across the country, compared to cohabiting couples, opposite sex cohabiting couples. The variation is 0.09, the variation is 0.17. And another measure of variation here, we can see that this number is lower than this one. And this number is higher than this one. So the range here is more farther away from 1 unit, right? So same-sex couples have uneven distribution in the US. Gay male couples are much more likely to be in some areas than in other areas. Lesbian couples are more concentrated in metropolitan areas in general than gay male couples, but they don't prefer particular cities as gay men. What it's saying, first sentence here, lesbian couples are more concentrated in metropolitan areas in general, than gay male couples. Where did we get this result from? From here. It's 0.37 and 0.31. No, they're actually less concentrated overall. I mean, it's the mean. Here they're less concentrated because this number here is closer to 1 unit. And here they're more concentrated because this number is farther away from 1 unit. These numbers here are closer to 1 unit. It shows they're less concentrated. They're more spread across. Lesbian couples, closer to 1 unit compared to gay couples, right? So that's what we are saying. Lesbian couples are more concentrated in metropolitan areas in general than male couples. No, I mean, they explain this result in the textbook, but these numbers don't show this. Because this number here is actually showing that the gay couples are more concentrated, not the lesbian couples, if you look at this overall mean. This analysis here might be based on other statistics that they have. But they say that lesbian couples don't prefer a particular cities as gay men. And but you also see that lesbians here, this number is higher than San Francisco. Yeah, so this analysis here that they put in this, that I got from the textbook that they're explaining here, is not completely based on this table. It's more based on more in-depth analysis that they looked at the overall results. Opposite sex couples are the majority of couples in any metropolitan area. They are just about as likely to reside in any of the areas, so the ratio is around 1 unit. Especially married couples, the minimum and maximum values are closer to 1 unit, and that's what I explained here, okay? Yeah, because if you look at the overall result, lesbian couples are less concentrated than gay couples. Yeah, this is not based on that table that in the previous slide. And this is result from the General Social Survey and about support of same-sex marriage that has been increasing over time. And this is data that goes from a little before 1990 and goes until, this is data until 2016. And also overall, you see that younger people, in this case here, people between 18 to 34 years of age, have higher percentages of support to same-sex marriage, because pretty much the question is whether homosexuals should have the right to marry, either agree or disagree. And older people, this line here for 65 plus, they have the lowest support for same-sex marriage. Okay? Any questions? So this part here was just a little confusing, just because it's not completely based on the previous table. It's more based on the research that they did, but it's not shown in table format in the textbook, okay? The next chapter is about contraception and birth control. Of course, I don't think we will be able to see all the material that we have here. And pretty much this chapter is divided between these 3 topics here: brief history of fertility control, current patterns of fertility control, and methods of family planning. And here at the end, I'm just updating with the most recent data that we have about the current coronavirus pandemic. In this chapter, the authors, they discuss specifically the methods of birth control, how they work and how they prevent pregnancy and everything, even in more biological terms. I'm not going to focus on that analysis that they provide in the chapter. I will focus more on this overall history of fertility control and the overall patterns of fertility control, right, of contraception use around the world, and also focusing a little more in the US. So today, most married and unmarried sexually active women and men in the US and in other developed countries limit their family size and or control the time and spacing of their births through birth control. Fewer people in developing countries use birth prevention methods, but the percentage of those using contraceptive methods in developing countries have also been increasing over time. There are a variety of methods available to women and men to prevent birth. The most popular ones around the world are contraception, sterilization, and abortion. And the effectiveness of these methods differ from one another, and each has its advantages and disadvantages. So just to give you an idea, the prevention of contraception, it's something that has been in the human society for thousands of years already. And so we find the notion of birth prevention appeared early in human history, in Egypt, in the Latin works of Pliny and the Elder and Dioscorides, Greek writings of Soranus, and the Arabic medicine in the 10th century. This is just to show that this notion that we as human beings can prevent having babies, it's something that has been there in human history for a long time. Most fertility control methods at those times here, of course, they were relatively ineffective, with the exception of induced abortion and withdrawal. But the methods that I had available at that time, it was not so effective as we have with more modern contraceptive methods in recent years, in recent decades. A little bit on the history of contraception you can find on several books here. In this book, Medical History of Contraception, there's an exhaustive survey of contraception covering many cultures worldwide over 3,000 years. It was published back in 1936. Contraception, a history of its treatment by the Catholic theologians and canonists, also looking at the history of contraception from the pre-Christian era to 1960s, with an emphasis on the interpretation and reception of contraception in the Catholic Church. So all these different historical facts and how the use of contraception developed through human society has been the subject of several books. Contraception, a history, it extends on and updates much of the work of Himes and Noonan. History of contraception, it's pretty much showing that there's a major historical treatment showing how contraception developed through time. A history of contraception and abortion, it also focuses on the use of plants and herbal products to regulate fertility, right? Contraceptive methods have been available and used by the end of the 19th century. And except for hormonally-based methods, condoms were available since around the 17th century, and intrauterine devices, IUDs, were first developed in Germany in the 1920s. But IUD was not possible in the US until much later, because research was not allowed, was not possible in the US because of legal and other types of restrictions. The manual vacuum aspiration method of abortion was first described by the gynecologist of the Queen Victoria of England. So it has been, the use of contraceptives have been there for centuries. The physiological principles behind oral contraceptives actually were developed since the 1920s. But the method made no progress, partly because of the lack of a cheap source of steroid, and also because contraceptive research was not academically acceptable. So a lot of these cultural barriers had to be overcome. In this case of like academic research was not acceptable at that time to understand contraceptive methods, but even more technological advances were not available at that time. What about the current patterns, not the historical use of contraception in human history? What about the current patterns of fertility control? Here I'm showing data from the Population Reference Bureau, also data that's available in the textbook. It shows data from 2002 and 2012 on percentages of married women using various family planning methods for the world and most sub-regions around the world. And usually when we do this analysis of contraceptive use, we focus on women between 15 and 49 years of age, as we have been seeing throughout the whole semester, women within reproductive ages. Data portray a contemporary empirical picture of the reproductive revolution since the 1950s, using various family planning methods. For this table here that they show, for all these different regions in the world, there is no data for Europe and Oceania due to scarcity of family planning surveys conducted in many of these countries. That's interesting because in developing countries such as Asia and mostly Africa, the total fertility rate is higher than in Europe, for example. Exactly because it's higher, scientists, they want to better understand what's going on in those places. We have more surveys and more surveys trying to capture which kind of family planning method women and couples have been using. So that's why we have more data for example, Asia and Africa compared to Europe and Oceania. So here we see the percentage of women, married women, who are using any kind of method around the world, more developed countries, less developed, and the least developed. Using percentage of married women using modern methods. And overall, you see some variation here, but when you compare more developed countries, 63%, and less developed countries, 56%, this difference is not so big. But then when you look specific in the least developed countries, and then you look specifically in Africa and sub-Saharan Africa, you start to see a drop on the use of modern family planning methods among married women. And here's to give an idea of variations on the type of methods that are being used. In more developed countries, like I mentioned, we don't have much data here, but in less developed countries, there is a higher concentration around IUD and female sterilization. And in the least developed countries, more concentration or higher percentage of use of pills and injectables, right? In Asian countries, a higher percentage of IUD and female sterilization, which this data here kind of drives the results for the less developed countries here, the 17, 14, and 22, 19. And as I mentioned, we don't have much data for Europe, and for Oceania as well, we don't have information about specific methods here. But there is data for Australia, for example, within Oceania. So less developed countries have almost similar levels as more developed countries, but the use of family planning methods is quite uneven across the various countries. So this number here, 63 and 56, they are similar, but if you look at specific countries, you start to see some variation. And even in specific continent of Africa, you see a drop compared to the overall percentage on less developed countries. Percentage of married women using modern methods varies from 1% in South Sudan and Somalia, 2% in Chad, comparing to more than 80% and almost 90% in these countries, like 84% in UK and China, 87% in Portugal, 88% in Norway, okay? Whenever we are trying to understand which are the methods that people use more in terms of to control birth, so family planning, methods, we also have the opposite information here. We know that 63% of married women around the world are using any kind of method. Any kind of method. I'm not looking at only modern methods. I'm not looking at traditional method, any method, 63. So it means that 37% of married women around the world are not using any method of family planning. So does it mean that 37% of women are at risk or have a chance to get pregnant? No. And that's the discussion that we're going to do here in these next slides. That data, that table is showing that 37% of married women worldwide are contraception non-users. They don't use any kind of method, traditional or modern. However, within this 37%, there are several subcategories of women. Some of these 37% are women who are surgically sterile via hysterectomy. So what is hysterectomy? Surgical removal of the uterus and sometimes the additional removal of the fallopian tubes and the ovaries, or by some other non-contraceptive operation. So these women, of course, they are not using any kind of contraception because they are not likely to have children because they pass through the surgery. Women who themselves or their male partners are non-surgically sterile. They did not pass by any surgery, but for some reason or the other, for biological reasons, either the woman or the partner are sterile. So, since they don't have chances of having children, they do not use any contraception, but they are not likely to have children because they are sterile. Women who are pregnant also don't use any kind of contraception, but women who are pregnant are already pregnant, so they cannot get pregnant again while they are pregnant. Or women who are breastfeeding, after the birth of the child, they are much less likely to have children. So women who are breastfeeding, they are in postpartum infecundability. They don't have chances to have children. They might not be using contraception, and they are not likely to have children. Other women, some women around this 37 here, they might actually be trying to get pregnant. So they intentionally don't want to use any kind of contraception. And that's not a problem from the policymaker point of view, because we're pretty much saying, if a woman won't get pregnant, so she's not using any kind of contraception, that there is not a specific policy that we should implement to bury her from her will to have a child. Another group, women who have never had intercourse or have not had intercourse in the first 3 months are considered not sexually active. So that's the concept of women or people who are not sexually active are those who have never had an intercourse or not had an intercourse in the first 3 months. So these people are not at risk or do not have a chance to have a child, so they don't have to use any form of contraception. The issue for policymakers are among these 37% of married women who are not using any kind of contraception, women who are not using any kind of contraception and are engaged in unprotected intercourse, so they are sexually active, they have been having intercourse in the last 3 months before the survey, and they are at risk of becoming pregnant, but they don't want to become pregnant. They're not like this woman in this previous group. They're not using contraception. They have been active sexually, and they report in the survey that they do not want to become pregnant. So in that case, It's a case that policymakers or the government or some other kind of initiative should be provided, even informational, for those women to use contraception in order to prevent them to get an unintended pregnancy. An unintended pregnancy, it's more harmful exactly for women who are more vulnerable, have lower socioeconomic status, and have lower education. It will increase their chances of dropping out from school when they are younger and so on. Okay? And that's all things that we already discussed before. What about in the US? What is the data on non-users? It's kind of like almost similar to the overall data for the world. 62% of all women aged 15 to 44 are using family planning methods in the US, and 38% are not using any contraceptive method. So 38 in the US, and we saw here 37% in the world. Of these 38, only 8% who are not using contraceptive methods are sexually active and thus at risk of an unintended pregnancy, and they said that they don't want to get pregnant. Out of the 38, only 8% fall in this group here of women who are sexually active, not using contraception, do not want to get pregnant. Right? So they are at risk of an unintended pregnancy. And I have already mentioned here throughout the class that we have different kinds of contraceptive methods. And it can be basically divided in two groups, traditional and modern methods. Traditional family planning methods include the less effective, what are called natural methods. Calendar rhythm method, periodic abstinence, withdrawal, long-term abstinence, and prolonged breastfeeding. By women prolonging breastfeeding, they would have lower chances of having children. So these are considered traditional family planning methods, and they are less effective than modern methods. What are the examples of modern methods? The main modern methods of family planning are pills, oral contraceptive, intrauterine device, contraception injection, male condom, male sterilization, female sterilization. Other modern methods that are also exist but are not so common: diaphragm, vaginal contraceptives, foams and jellies, contraceptive implants, and female condom. And also we have these natural family planning methods, fertility awareness methods, and standard days method, and Billy's ovulation method, that they are kind of like they try to follow the ovulation of women, and it's a little bit more efficient than periodic abstinence, and it's usually a family planning method that it's, for example, acceptable by the Catholic Church, because it's more like couples, they're following the ovulation of women, they know when woman is more or less likely to have children, and they pretty much, whenever woman is more likely to get pregnant, they just practice abstinence during that time. But it's a little bit more scientific, let's say, than a rhythm method, because they use swabs, and they try to see, to measure the level of ovulation that the woman has, or the chances that they have of getting pregnant specific times of the month, right? But the methods of family planning, of modern family planning, they're the most used, most common throughout the world, are the ones mentioned here at the top. And there are differences in contraceptive use. Women vary in the use of principal contraceptive methods around the world. The patterns of use has not changed much between 1990 and 2012. The most common method is female sterilization. 18% worldwide among married women. It's common in Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean, and North America. Intrauterine device, 13%, and it's common in Asia and Europe. Oral contraceptive and male condom, both around 8%. Injectables, 5%, and male sterilization, 3%. So these are the most common: female sterilization followed by IUD and oral contraceptive and male condom. Okay? And this is exactly this data that we are showing from 1990 to 2011. And here showing data for the world, 1990 to 2011, Africa, Asia, Europe, Latin America, the Caribbean, North America, and Oceania. Female sterilization with the highest percentage, and also IUD. Pills also by itself, higher percentage, and other methods of family planning. In Asia, high percentage of female sterilization, and also IUD. In Europe, you have more pills and other methods of modern methods. So there is more like a mix of modern methods, more variety of methods in Europe, and also in North America. Women are able to better choose out of like several options, whatever method they want. But in North America, there's a higher percentage of those with using female sterilization compared to Europe, and a smaller percentage pills compared to Europe. But the overall number of percentage of women using other modern methods show that they have series of different options in those countries. The same thing for Oceania. So this is good. In Europe, North America, and Oceania, you have a more spread of women using different modern methods. It shows that they have more options. And in Latin America and the Caribbean, and in Asia, and in Africa, you see that women using other modern methods is much smaller. Exactly because you have more concentration. In Latin America, you have more concentration around female sterilization pills. Asia, female sterilization IUD. And Africa, concentration in pills and injectable. And the overall levels still really low, as we saw in that previous table. Only around 30% are using some kind of contraception. And this is percentage of married or in union women using different methods of contraception, right? Married or cohabiting women. One or two contraceptive methods comprise half or more of total contraceptive use among the married or cohabiting women in almost all countries. The pill is the dominant method in 20. Traditional methods are the dominant in 11 countries. And other modern methods comprise a relatively small percentage. Traditional family planning methods are employed by only around 6% of married women and men in the world. So it declined a lot from previous decades. As I showed in the previous graph, the overall percentage of family planning use is very low in Africa. Among married women who use a method, 1/6 of them utilize a traditional method. So this is bad because traditional methods, as we talked before, they are less effective. And that's exactly this percentage here. 1 in 6 women are using these traditional methods in Africa, this light green. In sub-Saharan Africa, 1/5 use traditional methods, right? Even higher percentages. In many sub-Saharan African countries, traditional methods account for more than 50%. So that's why you still have a lot of chances of having unintended pregnancies in African countries, and more specific in sub-Saharan countries, because of the high percentage of women using traditional methods, which are less effective on preventing pregnancy. For example, Somalia, 15% of women use any method, which is already low, right? Considering the world average, 15%, but only 1% use a modern method. So 85% of the women don't use any method, 15 use, but only 1% are using a modern method, really low. Democratic Republic of Congo, 18%, any method, 5% a modern method. Cameroon, 23, any method, only 14% use a modern method. So you see that Somalian Democratic Republic of Congo, you have really low percentage of women using modern method of family planning. And talk a little about abortion. An induced abortion is a pregnancy that has been terminated by human intervention with an intent other than to produce a live birth. The most complete data on induced abortions are from countries where abortion is legal. Exactly when abortion is illegal in a specific country, it's harder to ask those questions to women in surveys because they don't want to get in trouble. So it's more likely to find data on abortion, on induced abortions in countries where it's actually legal. But even in the US, where technically abortion is legal, you have been having like so many state policies trying to undermine the chances of women to have access to abortion. Even in the US, where technically abortion is legal, the quantity and quality of the data vary considerably, right? Abortion is legal, but as we know, each state can implement all these regulations that they say is because of public health reasons, but it's they're just trying to decrease the chances of women have access to abortion. And exactly in those states, you tend to have a lower quality of data related to abortion. So numbers of induced abortion. In 2008, there were an estimated 44 million induced abortions in the world. Most of the abortions in the world occur in developing countries. Out of 44 million, 38 million. In developed countries, only 6 million out of 44 million abortions around the world. This differential reflects the uneven distribution of the population in the two groups of countries. Of course, we have a bigger population in developing countries than in developed countries, right? So these are not rates. These are just what would be the numerator of the formula. But when you look at abortion rates, what is abortion rates? The number of abortions in the numerator, as we just talked here, divided by women age 15 to 44. Because this number is usually small, we multiply by 1,000. And it decreased from 35 per million, 35 per 1,000 women in 1995, to 28 per 1,000 women in 2008. In developing countries, it declined from 34 to 29. And in developed countries, it dropped even more, from 39 to 24. And developed countries usually have more developed countries proportionally have abortion is legal. But even abortion is being legal in those countries, they have lower rates of abortion. Because whenever a country allows women to decide to end pregnancy with an induced abortion, they also provide to women a series of other modern methods of family planning. As we saw in the previous graph, the percentage of women using all these other forms of modern family planning is higher exactly in more developed countries, North America, Europe, and Oceania. And when you provide abortion, with that, you provide other methods of family planning, other modern methods of family planning. So women are less likely, proportionally, to actually have an induced abortion if they have all these other options available today, and they have those options, they are affordable, and they have the information about them. Right? So here is the number of abortions. This would be the numerator, as I mentioned before, and the abortion rate, declining from 35 to 28 in the world, 39 to 24 in developed countries, and 34 to 29 in developing countries. And the highest values are in Africa, and also in Latin America. And it's interesting because Latin America, most of the countries do not allow abortion. Abortion is illegal. By not having abortion, these countries also don't make it accessible other modern methods of family planning to women in an affordable way. And a lot of women don't have information about them. So they don't have other methods available to them, so they have higher chances of performing abortion, even though abortion is illegal, for example, in Brazil, right? So whenever you have a law permitting abortion, it comes with a mix of modern methods of contraception available to women in an affordable way and with information to them. The greatest abortion rates decline happened in Europe from 48 per 1,000 women to 27 per 1,000 women between 1997 and 2008. It was primarily due to the precipitous drop in Eastern European that drove the entire continent's decline. So the rates of abortion declined a lot after the end of the Soviet Union and all these countries in Eastern Europe dominated by communist regimes. So exactly between 1995 and 2008, it dropped a lot. Abortions do not occur more often in countries where they are legal versus in countries where they are illegal. It's exactly what I was talking before. The rate of abortion is 29 abortions per 1,000 women in Africa, where abortion is mostly illegal. And it's 27 abortions per 1,000 women in Europe, where it is mostly legal. Because when you provide abortion legal to women, you also provide information, you also provide access to other methods, you also provide access to affordable methods, modern methods. So women, of course, abortion is not an easy process. They would prefer to have access to other modern methods instead of performing abortion. So the policy should be not necessarily abortion, but provide all these different methods and women decide whatever they want. And they should be affordable to women. Provide this mix of methods of family planning. Abortions are safer in countries where they are legally performed than where they are illegally performed. And according to the World Health Organization, an unsafe abortion is a procedure for terminating a pregnancy that is performed by an individual lacking the necessary skills on an environment that does not conform to minimum medical standards or both. But then some more conservative states in the country, here in the US, use this, the concern of abortions being dangerous to women to say that they are closing a series of abortion clinics because they're concerned with the health and safety of women. Yeah, abortion has to be performed in all these specific places with correct medical professionals, but it's not a major surgery so dangerous as other surgical procedures. So they use this argument of closing a series of clinics because of them being unsafe, but it's actually not true. It does have to follow specific patterns, specific safety measures, but it's still, they are using argument, a public health argument or safety argument, but in reality, they are just trying to follow their whatever values that they might have. But they don't say that because that would be the counter argument against those kind of procedures or reasons to implement regulations on abortion. The counter argument would be much stronger because those people would say, no, I'm implementing all these policies because of my religious background, because I'm conservative, but your religious background, your conservative style should not be forced into other people. Each person should decide whatever value they have ideologically, and each person should choose whatever religions they have, or no religions at all, or no religion at all. So they don't use that argument, they use the fake argument of safety, but that's all typical from these arguments, these policies that are implemented with no intention on science, no intention whatsoever facts, just on religion and conservative values. The percentage of all abortions that were unsafe increased from 44% to 49% between 1995 and 2008. Disparity between the proportion of unsafe abortions in developed and developing countries, it's a fact. Almost all abortions in developed countries are safe, and usually in developed countries, abortions are legal, and by being legal, they are safe. More than 97% of all abortions performed in Africa actually are unsafe, based on data from 2008. And most of these countries have abortion is illegal. In Asia, the proportion of abortions that are unsafe varies widely by sub-region, from virtually none in Eastern Asia to 65% of unsafe abortions in South Central Asia. In terms of contraceptive behavior in the US, the National Survey of Family Growth that we already talked in this course here, it's a nice source of data. As I just mentioned in the previous slide, 62% of women between the ages of 15 and 44 during these years were using some form of contraception, and 38% were not. 17% were using pills, 16.5% had passed through female sterilization, 10% had the partner using male condom, 6.2% the partner passed through male sterilization. Unlike the situation worldwide, for US women, the IUD is one of the least favored methods of family planning among the modern methods. And this is just the data that I just mentioned here now for the US women 15 to 44 between 2006 and 2010. And this is percentage distribution of women age 15 to 44 by whether they are using contraception. Using contraception are the blue shades here. And if they're not using contraception, they are in the red shades. And what are the reasons? They are pregnant, so that's why they are not using any contraception. They're pregnant, or they're through the postpartum breastfeeding. They have not had sex in the last 3 months, and all other reasons together, 10%. And within this 10%, you have another smaller share, like the 8% that we saw before, of women who are sexually active, not using contraception, and who do not want to get pregnant, so they are exposed to unintended pregnancy. Right? And female sterilization pills with the highest percentages. Well, that's exactly what I just said now. Of the 38% of women not using contraception, 2.1% are sterile, 9% are pregnant or just gave birth, 12% almost have never had intercourse, 7.3% are not sexually active, and then 7.7%, around 8%, are known users of contraception and are sexually active and do not want to be pregnant. So only 20% of this 38, 7.7 divided by 38, of the non-users of contraception are sexually active and do not fall into one of the other categories. Only sexually active women are truly at risk of unintended pregnancy. So overall, 7.7% of women in the US, based on this data, are at risk of having an unintended pregnancy. And 7.7% of these women are 7.7 out of 38 is 20% of women who are non-users. Actually, only 20% of them are at risk of having unintended pregnancy. Among all contracepting women aged 15 and 44, The most popular contraceptive methods are oral contraceptive and female sterilization. So this is the denominator is only women with contraceptive, using contraception. So these numbers here, 17 and 17, is among all women. These numbers here, 27.5 and 26.6, is among women who are using some sort of contraception. That's the denominator here. Among currently informed married women, the most popular method is female sterilization. And among cohabiting and never married women, the most popular method is the pill, right? Never married woman is the pill, and among married women are more likely to have reached the number of children that they wanted. So they pass through female sterilization, they don't want to have children anymore. And never married women, they might be engaged in sexual activities, but then they still want to have children later on, but temporarily, at this present moment, they use the pill. And that's just the information that I said below, the use of contraception by married women and cohabiting women. And here is the effective contraceptive use by union status and race ethnicity, showing that Black women cohabiting have lower rates of using effective contraceptive use than white, even compared to Hispanic as well. And among married women, also Black women are less likely to be using some form of effective contraceptive use compared to white and Hispanic women. Usually it's related to socioeconomic status as well, affordability of contraceptive methods for African American women. It's more expensive for them. They don't have health insurance that cover the contraceptive methods. Usually for married couples, it's harder to negotiate within the couple the use of condom, which would be more affordable. But then other forms of contraception might be more expensive for these people. It's usually related to socioeconomic status, right? Contraceptive use by age also varies by age. Oral contraceptives, higher percentage among younger women, and female sterilization among older women. Older women have a higher chance to have already completed the intended number of children that they want to have throughout their lives. So they pass through female sterilization. And younger women still want to have more children, so they just use pills. And then later on, they might want to have children. By education, those with less education tend to rely on female sterilization. Those with more education use the pill. But usually, there are some studies that show that women who are less educated related to socioeconomic status, as we mentioned before, they usually have children earlier on at younger ages. And as soon whenever they reach the number of children that they have, they're more likely to pass through female sterilization. So there is also that, the timing, right? Use of oral contraceptive, 11% among women without a high school, and 35% among women with at least 4-year college. But these studies, this analysis here, like I said, can be a little controversial because of the timing. Exactly because women who are less educated, they tend to have children at younger ages. Then whenever they reach whatever amount of children that they want to have, they pass through female sterilization. And that drives this value here. But that can be a really controversial topic as well. The use of contraception in women's first premarital intercourse is important because it's the beginning of the exposure to the risk of getting pregnant. Teenagers who do not use contraceptive methods the first time they have sex are twice as likely to become pregnant and have a baby. And that's percent of teenagers using contraceptive at first sex has been increasing over time, and usually is condom, right? Not a permanent method like female sterilization, of course. Abortions became legal in the US in 1976, and 73 has been a huge debate now in the US. Between 73 and 2011, 53 million legal abortions were performed, but it has been declining over time. Percentage of women expected to have an abortion by age, 43%, 30%. And about 20% of pregnancies end in abortion in the US. Abortion is one of the most common surgical procedures experienced in the US and the least risky, as I was discussing before. So after the implementation of the law, it increased, but in more recent years, it got in the same levels as before the implementation of the law, making abortion legal. And of all abortions, 33% are performed by younger women, and abortions are usually performed more by non-Hispanic white women compared to any other race ethnicity group. 37% by Protestants, and 28% by Catholics, and 45% by women who have never married or are not presently cohabiting, and 61% by women who already have a child, at least a child, to show that abortion is not because that woman doesn't want to have a child forever, it's just because they already reached the amount of children that they have, or they don't want to have another child at that specific moment. Around 89% of all legal abortions performed in the US were to women in the first 12 weeks, so within the law. Within 3 months, right? And that's this result here. Getting all these numbers here together, 33%, 29, 25, 1/3 of abortions occurred at 6 weeks of pregnancy or earlier, this 33, and 89 occur in the first 12 weeks. 12 weeks, adding this 33 to this one and this one. So really following the law of having abortion at earlier times, like in the first 3 months. And these percentages here are usually women who have risk of high risk of dying because of pregnancy, so they usually have abortions in later times during their pregnancy. So I will just go up to here, so I will not discuss methods of family planning. So the chapter for the final exam will be race, ethnicity, family and sexuality, and this chapter here about contraception, but we will not cover these methods of family planning. So it will be just these two first topics here. And just to finalize, I wanted to highlight to you the first table that I showed to you guys in August 24, how the number of deaths that we had for the current coronavirus pandemic increased to 225,000, and I showed it again whenever we are talking about the chapter about mortality. And now we reached more than 260,000 people. This is the graph that I showed to you guys when we were discussing the chapter about mortality on October 20th. And we're already seeing that it was coming. And data just from now, see this curve here is this one. So the number of cases increasing greatly. A lot of people saying that the pandemic was over. It's not over. Data from October that I showed you in the mortality chapter, and data from now. Number of deaths. The number of deaths now is higher than when we first started this class at the beginning of the semester. It was going down at the beginning of the semester. Now it's going up. This is data from the US, number of cases. This is when we were at the beginning of the semester. Cases, deaths. Number of deaths and cases going down. This is now, right? Texas, same thing. Cases and deaths were going down. And remember, this red and black dotted lines here is just to show the peak of cases and peak of deaths. And we have this peak of cases here, already increasing the number of deaths. This is still going up. We're expected to see these numbers still high here in these next weeks. Hospitalizations in Texas now, when we started the semester. It's higher now, and this is Texas. Average daily cases in October, when we discussed the mortality chapter, and now. This is daily cases per 100,000 people in the past week, so new cases. October, now. This is the case of Texas that I showed to you back in October, now. This is the case of for college campuses back in October, Texas A&M 1661, now 2521. Losing to Texas Tech, really high. Okay, so this is not a joke, this is serious. The pandemic's still there. With Thanksgiving, these numbers tend to keep increasing, more people dying. Quiz 20, it's available now at 4:30 until noon tomorrow. That's the last quiz. Final exam is going to be available on the exam day from 1 p.m. to 8 p.m. as usual. But as you started, you have actually 2 hours and 30 minutes to answer because it's the final. Only 40 questions, 0.5 points per question. Okay? If you want to have office hours, one-on-one Zoom meetings, I'm available next week. Just send me an email. And please, one thing, complete the teaching evaluation. The new website is called tamu.afis.net. So just go there and complete the course evaluation and give your feedback, because I'm always looking for ways to improve the class. And the link is this one that I'm putting on the chat, tamu.aefis.net. It should be PICA, but now it's this new link here, okay? tamu.aefis.net. Thank you very much. It was a challenge to teach this course pretty much online from the beginning to the end, which was a little different than last semester. And yeah, it was good to have at least the last day here 4 people in class. That was the practice. Thank you very much, and I hope I see you guys sometime, someday. That's whenever you want to contact me, I'm open, and you know my contact address. And have a happy Thanksgiving, and prepare for the final exam during the final exam week. Thank you very much.